Hey everyone, just a quick warning. This episode does have explicit language and may be inappropriate for kids.
Time as to how Jack Murphy will plead in this case?
Yes, he will plead not guilty. Not guilty by reason of insanity at the time of the arraignment, and not guilty by reason of insanity at the time of the commission of the offense.
My name is Nate Scott. I'm a reporter and editor with For the Win and USA Today Sports. This is The Sneak. Last episode, Jack Murphy recounted his version of what happened in Whiskey Creek. We'll get back to that, but first, we want to take you to his trial. Like every story in Jack's life, however, it's no straight shot to get there. As you might remember, Jack was bailed out after the Whiskey Creek arrest because the police only had circumstantial evidence. It was then he and Sonny Grech, among others, pulled off the robbery of Olive Wofford when Jack got into a firefight with police.
I go around this building and they're shooting and the shale shingles on this house are exploding. I got the stuff is all stuck. And so they grab me so shortly thereafter, they take me to a hospital. And then the next thing I'm in jail.
But once again, police couldn't hold him.
I get arrested and I bail out on that. At the meanwhile, the grand jury's meeting on these murder charges. I mean, everything is helter-skelter.
That's right. Jack was released again, even though he'd been connected to a double murder only a month earlier and had just engaged in a public firefight with police. Turns out Florida has been Florida for a long time. But Jack was out, and for a time, he would remain out. One of the reasons prosecutors failed to get an indictment for Jack was that they had put their faith in an unreliable star witness. Their witness was a man you've heard from before, Sonny Grech. See, Grech was in police custody following the Wofford robbery. He was Jack Griffith's roommate at the time, as well as an accomplice of Jack Murphy. So I have to imagine that State Attorney Russell Clark theorized that Grech must know something, and most likely would have compelling testimony that would connect Murphy and Griffith to the Whiskey Creek murders. Clark offered him immunity, but as Grech tells it, it was a mess. I'm just trying to get the immunity deal straight, because there were two cases here. There was the Wofford case and the Whiskey Creek. Were they offering you immunity for everything to testify in Whiskey Creek, or immunity if you testified in both? I'm just a little confused with what the immunity was for.
Well, so were the courts.
Is that why it got so messy? Because it's confusing reading the news stories even.
Yeah, but Russell Clark gave me immunity. He says, you have blanket immunity. You have immunity from everything. So that's what my attorney took it as. So when he went before the judge agreed with him and dismissed the charges.
Sonny would have his charges in the Wofford case dismissed. There was only one problem. He and his attorney knew there would be people waiting for him outside the courtroom.
So my attorney says, look, if you get granted immunity and his charges dismissed, there's going to be guys there to subpoena you to testify against Bobby Greenwood, Jack Murphy, and the other guy in court. And I said, well, I'm not going to do that. He says, well, you better figure a way to get it out of that courtroom because they're going to be there.
Sonny knew these were dangerous men, and he didn't want to testify against any of them in either the Wofford case or the Whiskey Creek case. So he made an escape plan.
I grabbed a couple of guys, and we went up to the courtroom beforehand and saw that the judge's door where he comes into the chambers led out into a hallway that led back into the lobby to a stairwell. And so I says, well, here's my escape. If he says the case is dismissed, I'm going to run out the Judge Chambers doors, down the hall, back into the lobby, and then down these stairs. So you guys stay up here and block anybody that tries to follow me.
Because you were worried about your safety at that point.
Well, I didn't want to get subpoenaed. Because if I got subpoenaed, then I got to testify, and I'm not going to testify.
When the judge granted the immunity, Sonny took off running.
So he dropped the gavel and said, case dismissed, and I bolted.
Sonny ran out the back and got in a car that was waiting for him. But there was a problem. A cop saw him do it.
So he jumps in the middle of the street and aims his gun right at the windshield. So naturally we stopped. So I get out of the car and I says, look, and meanwhile, all the TV media is running down the street. So I says, look, I just got my case dismissed and I'm running from the media. I didn't break any laws. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just getting away from the media. So he says, what's your name? I said, Salvatore Grech. And I says, here they come. And there wasn't, and I says, and there's no cops chasing me. He says, get the fuck out of here. So I jumped in the car, went right to the airport, hopped the plane, and left.
With Sonny out of the state and refusing to testify in either case, the state appealed the judge's immunity decision. Grech lost and went to prison for the Wofford case. To this day, Grech maintains that neither Jack Murphy nor Jack Griffith ever told him anything about the Whiskey Creek murders. Did you ever talk with Jack Griffith about it after it happened?
You know, if I did, I don't remember.
So the immunity deal, why did they think that you would have information they could use?
Of course, I lived with Jack Griffith at the time.
Yeah.
You know, and they probably thought just like you, that he probably said something to me, you know. But I really don't remember him ever telling me anything about it.
Wow.
Nor would I want to hear about it. You know, if he did, I probably would have told him to shut the fuck up. I don't want to know.
In any event, the Grech immunity gambit had been a failure, and he was in prison. So prosecutors had to rebuild their case. This time, however, they got it done.
Finally, on the third time that the grand jury convenes, they get an indictment and arrest me for 2 counts of first-degree murder.
We'll get back to Jack's trial in a second, but first, I wanted to give you an update. You might remember from last episode that while we were reporting out this season, we'd gone on a hunt for the families of the 2 victims of the Whiskey Creek murders. Quickly, the Frank family. This week we found Bill Frank, the widow of Terry Kent Frank. He's living in the South, and I won't reveal any more than that because I want to respect his privacy. Bill Frank and Terry were already separated back in 1969 when she had her tragic run-in with the group of men from Florida. He didn't speak much to press even back when it happened. We found a phone number and an email connected to Frank and left messages with both. He hasn't gotten back to us, though. I also messaged his daughter from a second marriage on Facebook, and she hasn't responded either. In our quest to find Anna Lyles, the mother of Annalee Marie Moan, we're making much better progress. As you might remember, after months of nothing, we'd caught a break when we found a photo of Annalee Marie Moan's gravestone. And on the gravestone was a space reserved for someone who maybe, possibly, was still alive. Her mother, a woman named Anna Lyles. But our investigator found something else. Anna Lyles appears to have another daughter, Inez Lyles, Annalee's stepsister. Unlike Anna, Inez does have a listed phone number. We're reaching out to her later today. Okay, back to the trial. The indictment was finally in. Jack Murphy would be tried for murder in the Whiskey Creek case. And the prosecution had a new star witness, a man whose given name was James Kenneth Boyden. But everyone called him Kenny the Cat. We spent weeks trying to track down Kenny the Cat Boyden this year. We found an article about a James K. Boyden that would have been the right age, who had been hit by a stray bullet in a robbery in Austin, Texas in 1984. He survived, but was listed as a vagrant by the Austin American-Statesman, which might explain why it's been difficult to track him down. We thought we had found him possibly living under a new name in Santa Ana, California, but the phone number at the house was disconnected, and we were unable to follow up on any leads. Back in 1969, Kenny the Cat Boyden was a 23-year-old cat burglar who was an acquaintance of Jack Murphy and Jack Griffith. He'd actually served time in Rikers Island at the same time as Murphy. In video footage at the trial, Boyden is boyish-looking, with a mop haircut. When he strides past the news cameras, he puts on hipster sunglasses and smiles. He's wearing a Nehru-style jacket, the picture of indifferent 1960s cool. Unlike Sonny Grech, Boyden did receive immunity for a different arrest and an unrelated robbery. And he did testify. In court, Boyden said that he and Murphy set up the murders after they were hanging out with Terry Kent Frank and Annalie Marie Moan. They were watching TV, Boyden said, when one of the women mentioned she wanted to go water skiing. I looked at Mr. Murphy, Boyden said, and he looked at me. There was a sort of a visual agreement. That visual agreement, Boyden suggested, was Murphy letting him know that's how he'd get rid of the two women. The day after the murder, Boyden testified, he then came and helped get rid of the belongings of Frank and Moan. Boyden said he asked Jack Murphy, "How did it go?" To which Jack replied, "Pretty sloppy." Boyden also said that Jack was carrying a shirt at the time that had splotches of blood on it. In cross-examination, Jack's attorney at the time, who's yet another Jack Nagley, went on the attack. He asked Boyden questions designed to get under his skin, like if it was true that he had been treated for venereal disease in prison. Nagley then produced a copy of a handwritten letter which Boyden had sent to Murphy. The letter read, quote, "Everything I told the Broward grand jury can be proven false by other testimony." At this point, Boyden turned to the judge and actually said, "Would I be in contempt if I told this counselor to go to hell?" When the judge said yes, he would, Boyden relented, admitting he did send the letter. And then Nagley went for the jugular. "Kenny the Cat," he said, "why don't you tell me who the other man was in the boat with you?" This was Nagley's home run swing. It hadn't been Jack Murphy at all in the boat, Nagley was suggesting, but rather Kenny the Cat Boyden. There was a problem with Nagley's argument, however. Kenny the Cat had a corroborating witness, his girlfriend at the time, a woman named Valerie Ann Carter. Carter was from England and had moved back following everything that happened in Whiskey Creek. But the state flew her back, and during grand jury testimony, she backed up Boyden's story and recalled Boyden telling her about it when they saw it on the news. As the gruesome details were reported, Carter said that Kenny the Cat turned to her and said, "Jack Murphy killed those girls." As to why you're not hearing from any of these people now, Jack Nagley passed away in 2014. We believe Valerie Ann Carter also passed away, but we're working to confirm that. Back at the court case, Nagley wasn't making much headway with his Kenny the Cat was actually the one on the boat argument. But that wasn't the only home run swing that Nagley would attempt. He had another gambit, an insanity plea.
Now we're locked up, and we're getting ready to go to lots of courts in Fort Lauderdale and Miami. We're getting ready to do federal courts. We're getting ready to do jails and state hospitals because my attorney said we got to go crazy.
That's the voice again of Jack Murphy. The following, however, is the audio you heard at the very beginning of the episode, from a local television news interview his attorney, Jack Nagley, gave in 1968.
Time as to how Jack Murphy will plead in this case?
Yes, he will plead not guilty. Not guilty by reason of insanity at the time of the arraignment, and not guilty by reason of insanity at the time of the commission of the offense.
Jack Murphy, facing 2 murder charges and a potential ticket to Florida's death row, would plead insanity to save his life.
Said, plead insanity. Said, it's an easy thing to do. Said, all as crazy as you are, the stuff that you got to be insane.
And unbelievably, Nagley was right. In July 1968, Jack Murphy was found legally insane by criminal court judge Carling Stedman. Judge Stedman committed Murphy to a state mental hospital for an indefinite term and ruled that he be held under maximum security. A New York Times article at the time reported that several psychiatrists noted Jack, quote, believed he was a modern-day Robin Hood with a savior attitude. At the time, it was an astonishing twist and an already astonishing series of developments. Jack was a surfer, turned jewel thief, turned alleged murderer. And he was now also insane. Or was this all just another example of Jack's brazen willingness to flout the law? To help us answer those questions, we reached out to a friend and business partner of Jack's. I'm going to ask you to start by introducing yourself.
All right. By the way, what's this for?
This is for a podcast called The Sneak.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Dominic Fusco, and I don't even know what to go from there.
Dominic Fusco is a filmmaker who's been friends with Jack Murphy for years. They're developing a feature film project around Jack's life. Fusco is also heavily involved with the ministry, and when I tried to talk with him about where things went wrong for Jack, he pointed to Jack's upbringing.
Part of the reason he ended up doing what he did is he was amoral. He absolutely did not have a moral compass at all. No biblical upbringing. When everybody else was going to church in the 40s and 50s and the 60s, he did not go to church. His family didn't go to church. They had no religious foundation, so he was amoral.
This led to us talking about the insanity plea. You talk about that lack of a moral center. You know, he was briefly, by a court, ruled insane. You don't buy that, do you? I mean, he didn't strike me as insane.
No, and neither did the court. That was being insane. You know, now think about it. He didn't commit his life to God or anything at the time. And he paid the biggest lawyers in Miami. He always had thousands of dollars in his pocket. He had the biggest lawyers in Miami pay his way out of prison and jail. You know, they were always after him because of his big mouth and high profile. And so he got, I think it was the first court he went to was in Fort Lauderdale for the robbery he pulled off. And so his lawyer said, let's there's a new thing going on. Just, you're insane. Well, he's brilliant enough to play insane. And sure enough, they let him off on that charge. But then he had another charge in Miami.
This was the Wofford robbery case. In that case, the judge didn't believe the insanity defense.
They didn't buy it. And his release date for what he had done was 2244 AD. That's when he would have gotten out. He would have been out a lot sooner in a casket. But no, he's not insane at all. He's a real guy.
We should say the insanity ruling, it was extremely controversial even at the time. Judge Stedman contradicted two of the state's psychologists, both of whom said Murphy was sane. He sided with the psychologist that Murphy's team hired, even though that psychologist admitted under oath he didn't have time to do a full evaluation of Murphy. Judge Stedman also accepted testimony from a neurologist hired by the defense, who testified that while Jack didn't have any brain damage, he did have serious psychological issues, which isn't really a neurologist's area of expertise. If this all seems ridiculous to you, you have to remember that Jack had really good attorneys. And while you may see it a lot in pop culture, the insanity defense is actually exceedingly rare. A Psychology Today article noted that the insanity defense was used in fewer than 1% of United States cases, even in 2012. Judge Stedman, as well as all the psychologists who testified in this case, have since passed away, though, so we couldn't ask them about it. In any event, the ruling didn't hold up. The state of Florida finally deemed him fit enough to stand trial in the Whiskey Creek case, and on March 1st, 1969, a jury unanimously found Jack Murphy guilty of the murder of Terry Kent Frank. The punishment? Life in prison. In one of the oddities of this story, Murphy was never convicted of the death of Annalie Marie Moan. With him already receiving life in prison, prosecutors were content with his sentence for the murder of Frank. Plus, Murphy also had other charges hanging over him, the Wofford robbery case. In August 1969, the charges against Jack in that case were refiled, and this time, Jack pled guilty. Judge Stedman served Jack with yet another life sentence, plus an additional 20 years. Murphy never testified. In all the reports we could find, the fifth man, the one Jack now says pulled the trigger, was never mentioned.
Describing Murphy as a public enemy who never again should enjoy the free world of a law-abiding society, Judge Stedman sentenced the former Beach Boy turned jewel thief and murderer to life imprisonment and 20 years at hard labor. Suffice it to say that Murphy will be a very old man if and when he is ever released. Unless Murphy can achieve some sort of Birdman of Alcatraz fame, his public exposure is at an end. Now he'll just be another number at Rayford State Prison. This is Fred Francis, Channel 4 News in the Dade Justice Building.
Jack, of course, would prove Fred Francis very wrong. So prison.
So I told you yesterday that I go to the prison where the story Cool Hand Luke was written. And they talk just like in the movie. Merlin Struthers was the old actor who played the prison guard. And he said to Paul Newman, the convict, he says, in that whiny redneck voice, "What we have here is a failure to communicate." Well, when I got to prison, that's the way they talked. The guys studying, and they'd say, "Murphy, you ain't nothing up here, boy. You're going to get your mind right."
Right from the start in prison, Jack says he refused to submit to the rules, as he had refused to do so many times before. He was so appalled by the conditions in the prison, he says, he organized a demonstration.
I said, okay, here's what we'll do. The colleges around America are doing this Vietnam revolt. They're having these demonstrations, these quiet sit-down demonstrations. Let's just have one of those. Nobody's going to get ugly or mad or anything, but maybe we get some news people in, we get some coverage, and we can talk about the medical situation. There was other issues also.
What began as a gentle demonstration escalated quickly into a full-blown prison riot. The National Guard was called in.
And they came in there and they whipped some guys, and they pulled out some leaders, and we were the last wing, the ones that instigated it, and they came in there, and by now the hallway was full of blood, and there was some bodies in the hallway, and the squads came in, and then all of the CERT team, the security team, the goon squads came in with the clubs and the dogs and the mace and everything.
Jack says he was identified for his leadership role in the brutal escapade. In a newspaper article at the time, Murphy was identified as a, quote, agitator. He was punished mightily for his role in it, he says, which, Jack claims, ultimately changed everything for him.
They stuck me across the hall on death row for the next 7 months. And I was the only guy on death row that didn't have a death sentence. And they put me down there just to isolate me.
Little did he know, Jack was about to meet the man that would start him on his ultimate path to salvation. The meeting took place after he'd finally been moved out of solitary, and he was called into the warden's office.
I said, "What's going on up there? Because you don't ever go up to the warden's office." And he said, "The man's here from Tallahassee." And that means Louis Wainwright, the famous corrections leader.
For once, perhaps, Jack is underselling here. Because Louis Wainwright was, to put it simply, an absolute titan in the Florida prison system. He was the secretary of the Florida Division of Corrections from 1962 to 1987. He served under 6 different governors, and ultimately received the American Correctional Association's highest tribute, the E.R. Cass Award, for outstanding service.
So I go in there, and here's Louis Wainwright sitting behind the desk there, and he looks at me, and he says, "Murphy," he says, and I have to sort of clean it up a little bit. He said, "We're not going to put up with your stuff anymore." He said, "You think you're a shot caller, you think you're a leader." He said, "Let me tell you something. Real leaders don't have their kids growing up in a prison visiting park. So real leaders lead their people to higher ground, to good places and all." And it's very quiet. And I said, "Why are you telling me this?" He says, "I'm going to open the door and bring in programs. I'm going to bring in a whole lot of programs." He says, I go, "Why are you doing that?" He said, "I'll tell you why. I believe a man can change." And he says, "I'm going to bring in some real leaders, and what you need to do is sit down with these leaders and keep your mouth shut and listen, and maybe you'll learn how to be a real leader."
Wainwright had identified Jack as a high-profile name that other prisoners might listen to. He wanted Jack to get them to buy in on the programs. To convince Jack, however, he brought in some help.
I go back in room, and so this guy, Frank Costantino, comes in. He's been out of prison, he's working, and he's doing the right thing. He comes in, he says, "Make the programs work."
Frankie Constantino was a former street thug turned minister. And to learn about him, we have to go back to our old friend, Sonny Grech. When you heard Jack got out, were you surprised that he didn't spend the rest of his life in jail? Jack Murphy.
Yeah, I was really surprised, but I know Frankie Constantino got him out, and I can't remember the Reverend's name in the East Unit, because I was in the East Unit for a year.
Oh, so you guys were in prison together?
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. We were in the East Unit together. That's why I got shot on furlough 3 times, and ended up in the East Unit.
Well, Well, I want to hear about that story in a second, but
Yeah.
because he's told us about Frank Constantino.
Jack had to tell you about him because he'd get down and kiss Frank's ass every day. Frank's the one that got him out.
Coming up on Season 2 of The Sneak, we'll find out exactly how Jack Murphy got out of prison despite a double life sentence plus 20 years. We'll also continue our hunt for the surviving relatives of Terry Kent Frank and Annalee Marie Moan. And we'll discover that there are problems with the story that Jack Murphy told us about what happened at Whiskey Creek. Rusty is no longer a part of the story.
There's no Rusty anymore?
The Sneak is a production of For the Win and USA Today. It is written and produced by myself, along with Anthony Pacillo. Our field recordist is Gustavo Moeller, and our music supervisor and audio engineer is Claire Morgan of Notterly. Research by Emily Lacaze. Video and image work from Emmanuel Lozano and Alyssa Williams. Our executives are Mark Hyland, Scott Stein, and Kate Gutman. Special thanks to the USA Today podcast squad, Shannon Green and Claire Thornton, and the crew at Wondery, especially our marketing wizard, Alex Carpenter. Additional thanks to the investigative team at the Naples Daily News for their help with reporting, and the amazing team at Miami-Dade College's Wolfson Archives, who provided our archival footage.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, check out these other videos from USA Today to stay up to date with all the latest news.